Hi everyone, welcome to Itsy Bitsy's live read of Two Hearts Alliance by Tamara Ferguson, Chapter 1. Tucson, Arizona, Summer 2017. Captain Jeremy Northrup studied the men and women from the parachute unit who had arrived earlier today to assist with training the Iraqi airmen chosen to man the planes that the U.S. had gifted the Iraqi government in support of their mutual ongoing war with ISIS. Truthfully, Jeremy had no idea how much time they had left for training. Tensions were rising in the U.S., and the government could very well discontinue the program at any time and send the recruits who were temporarily residing in the U.S. back to Iraq. Jeremy had looked at it as his responsibility to get as much done in the short amount of time that they would probably have left as possible, so he called on Colonel Pierce for aid with extra manpower. The 6 recruits from Parachute had given up leave and downtime between tours to come here and assist during the next few days. A woman officer broke away from the group, approaching Jeremy and then giving him a salute. "Captain Northrup?" "Captain Christine Mckay, reporting for duty, among with some other members from my unit." "At ease, Captain Mckay," Jeremy answered, giving her a weary smile. Staring into her eyes had given him a sudden jolt of awareness that had taken him by surprise. "I'd like to fill you in about what we're trying to accomplish while we're here." "I guess we're on our way to breakfast?" she asked. "We are. Let's grab some food and discuss it over our meal, Captain," Jeremy answered. "And the name's Jeremy. As long as you don't mind, we can keep our conversation informal?" "That would be fine with me," she answered, nodding her agreement. "You can call me Christine." "No nickname?" he asked, motioning toward the mess hall. She gave him a fleeting smile. "I steered away from Chris while I was in medical school." He halted, giving her a side glance. She didn't look old enough to have advanced as far as she had while still attending med school, but then again, they were both captains, so she was probably approaching 30. She had him curious, that's for sure. He'd have to take a closer look at the personnel files that had been sent to him last evening. Despite her shortly cropped hair, she was awfully attractive. Of course, Jeremy hadn't been expecting a tall and curvy strawberry blonde officer who had the most beautiful sapphire eyes he ever had the privilege of looking into. She remained calm, cool, and collected, so obviously she had no interest whatsoever in him, which was probably a good thing, since they didn't need any distractions with so much to do in a short amount of time. He sighed, following her into the mess hall, lining up to grab coffee and a plate for the buffet. Christine inhaled a deep, unsteady breath as she followed Captain Northrup through the mess hall to a table in the corner which was obviously reserved for him. Jeremy. Just because she was married didn't mean she couldn't appreciate the big, broad shoulders and lean, narrow hips of the tall, good-looking officer leading her to the table. When her unit had arrived this morning, Christine had known immediately that he was the man in charge by his inherent air of authority. Both her father and grandfather exhibited the same characteristic swagger. When they reached the table, he laid down his tray and pulled out a chair for her. Catherine blinked. "That's not necessary." "I know," he answered, looking sheepishly. "Please don't read anything into it, but my mom taught me to be polite." Christine laughed sunnily, because her father was the same way. He had a hard time treating her as an officer as opposed to his daughter. "I know another officer who has the same trouble," she murmured. "My father." Jeremy looked thoughtful. "Mckay? I don't think I've heard the name." Why was Christine hesitant to tell him the truth? It didn't matter that their marriage was in trouble, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to stay married to Duane after discovering what had happened during her last tour in Iraq. The fact was, she was married, and that's the first thing she needed to tell the captain after noticing the obvious interest he'd had in her eyes when they'd met. "My maiden name is Karen," she answered. She was surprised and maybe a little pleased at how disappointed he looked when she answered, but then he seemed to quickly mask his emotions, turning thoughtful. "Cameron? Not the Major?" Christine nodded her agreement. "Yes. Have you met?" "No, but I've heard a lot of good things about him. He's the go-to officer who's helped clean up a lot of domestic issues relating to the sexual harassment charges filed a few years ago, isn't he?" "Yes, although he gained a lot of enemies during the process," Christine said softly, her eyes searching the room. "As far as I'm concerned, it's something that needed to be dealt with." Jeremy glanced around the room. "But I'll drop the subject. I gather it's something you don't want to talk about in mixed company?" "I'd rather not stir up hard feelings, but sometimes it can't be avoided." Christine scooped some eggs into her mouth and reached for her coffee. "So what's lined up for us to accomplish this week?" He grimaced. "Something that normally would take at least a month of instruction. Let me guess," she answered, becoming thoughtful. "Jumps and parachute training." Jeremy looked taken back. "The colonel filled you in?" "He didn't have to," she admitted. "He told me what had already been covered in your program, and I filled in the rest on my own. At least we've had these men here long enough to get them in pretty good physical condition." She glanced around the room again. "It doesn't usually work that way. They'll be feeling aches and pains in places they didn't know could hurt." Christine sighed. "The equipment to get started should be arriving shortly. All the Iraqi trainees are here." "There are 10? "Yes. We separated them from the trainees from other countries since we weren't sure if we would be allowed to continue." "We'll split them in half, if you'd like," he replied. "We've been working early evenings, so that would give you half a day with each group. I think evacuation training is our primary goal in case of engine trouble or enemy attack." "Not a problem," Christine answered, sipping more coffee before continuing to finish her breakfast. "We'll do what we can as fast as we can." Captain Mckay worked with the unit for the following 2 weeks, and Jeremy couldn't help but admire her efficiency and expertise, as well as her patience dealing with the Iraqi soldiers, some who were slightly rebellious, having a woman in charge. Her air of authority among with the respect she was treated with by other unit members had her quickly gaining their grudging acceptance. The unit had spent the entire first week going through further conditioning and learning about injury-free landings with the specialized machinery brought in. The parachute unit's stay had been extended for an additional week, and the second week of training would be taking place on site at the airport, while the last few days would require the men to actually jump and parachute out from the plane. But first, there would be several jumps with an expert partner from the parachute unit. After the 2 weeks were up, the Iraqis would be returning to their homeland, where a new training base was being constructed. Jeremy would be returning to active duty while another officer would take charge of the program, which would be moving permanently to the U.S. from the U.S. to Iraq. They were scheduled to jump today since the weather conditions were good, and Jeremy sat with Christine at the table where they shared breakfast every morning and discussed their progress from the day before. Otherwise, they rarely saw each other during the day. The next few days would be different, though, since everyone was scheduled to jump. Jeremy grinned, watching her eat. Her appetite was kind of amazing, but since he rarely saw her taking any kind of break, he shouldn't be surprised, he supposed. She looked up, obviously sensing his eyes upon her. "What?" "I can't get over how much you eat." She laughed. "When I was young, I was skinny as a rail, and the envy of all my friends." He shook his head dazedly. She wasn't so skinny anymore. He really needed to quit thinking about her. Period. She was married, for Christ's sake. He needed to get over this crazy infatuation he had for her. It's just that he'd known a lot of women in his life, and he'd never met one that seemed so right for him. He had a feeling that she knew he was attracted, even though he was doing his best not to let it show. In fact, every night when he was finishing up his makeshift office, he tamped down the urge to join her when she went for an evening run, and had switched up his routine and done his jogging in the morning instead. While the unit would only be here a few more days. Where are you headed after you leave here? She pursed her lips. I'll be going on special assignment. Occasionally I do undercover work for AFOSI, and they need me for something urgent. Really? I'm impressed, Jeremy answered, suddenly feeling worried, even though she obviously knew how to defend herself if she was being assigned to a special case. What about you? I'll be heading back to Iraq. I hear there's some trouble brewing, although I'm not allowed to talk about it. She sighed, standing from the table. I've been hearing things too. She looked at her watch. Ready to do some jumping? He gritted his teeth. Only if I have to. She blinked, giving him a slow smile. Of course you do. We're in charge, so we've got to set an example. He groaned. Christine couldn't believe she was doing this, strapping herself to Jeremy so that they could set an example, as partners jumping out from the plane. 2 more pairs would be jumping a few minutes behind, so they'd all have some backup in the air and on the ground. Jeremy obviously hadn't enjoyed this part of the training as a pilot, and Christine grinned, recognizing the dread she saw in his eyes. It's not that bad, she murmured. I love it. You must be a thrill-seeker, he growled softly. I figure there are plenty of other ways to kill myself if I really want to. Christine laughed loudly, and it seemed to ease the tension of everyone sitting and waiting in the rear of the plane. Check your chute, she murmured. We'll break away on my command. He grunted, looking down and making sure his fastenings were tight on his parachute. The pilot's voice shot out from the speakers. We're approaching our first drop. 10, 9. Lieutenant Jeff Frisco stepped up to assist, sliding the door wide. Ma'am, sir, we're just about there. Christine grinned, looking at Jeremy and reaching for their hands. And go, Sergeant Frisco murmured as they stepped off the edge together and dropped into the air. Jeremy closed his eyes and groaned. Open your eyes, she yelled. You act like you've never done this before. As little as I can, he mouthed, as she took control and started judging the distance. And then she looked back into his eyes where he was studying her intently. He suddenly grinned, and her heart started racing madly. Get yourself together, Christine, she thought to herself. Another pair of men were dropping in the distance, and soon another pair followed. She motioned with her hand that it was time for them to split up and open their chutes. Jeremy was looking a little less nervous when she let go. This was part that she loved, opening the chute and maneuvering the parachute in the air. Jeremy wasn't too rusty, she noticed, although his motions were a little unsteady after opening his chute. Approaching the ground, Christine landed smoothly in a run close to the spot where she'd been targeting. She had a hard time holding back laughter, watching Jeremy land a little roughly on his butt in some bushes in the distance. After making sure everyone had landed safely, she quickly called in the coordinates to the airman who was responsible for picking them up. Christine effectively began gathering her chute so she could roll it up and assist the students who seemed to have landed in one piece, although rather awkwardly. Well, so had Jeremy, and he appeared to be having trouble gathering his chute, so after unhooking her harness, she rushed to assist as the other instructors from her unit helped each of their individual partners. Jeremy gave her a weary smile when they finished. That wasn't as bad as I remembered, but the last time I did this, I was on my own, of course. He grimaced, bending over to finish packing his chute. She raised a brow. Are you all right? Just a little sore where I landed, he answered, rubbing his rear end. Hopefully our ride will be here to pick us up shortly. Too bad the next time around I won't be able to join in the fun. Christine rolled her eyes, laughing. Thank you for listening to this portion.